everybody, my name is Sasha. Today I want to talk to you about something called fast fashion. Now, 80 billion pieces of clothing are consumed globally. That's up 400% from 20 years ago. That is crazy. Now, how did this major shift happen? And how is it affecting the planet in both social and environmental ways? These are the things that I want to look at in this video about fast fashion and the impact that it's having on the world. Now, the fast fashion industry was started in the late 20th century by companies such as Zara, H&M, and Forever 21. And these are companies that wanted to try to take advantage of a new type of consumer, a consumer that wanted to follow trends and a consumer that wanted products very quickly. This led to a new type of fashion production, one that instead of trying to produce, say, 1 or 2 sets of new clothing every year, they would instead try to produce as many different lines of clothing as possible within a given season. Some brands bragging that they could produce new garments every single week. Now, one of the things that defines fast fashion is that they are consumer driven. They are looking at what the consumer wants. This stems from flexible supply chains. Supply chains are essentially just the way that products are made, traveling from raw materials all the way to being sold in stores. The idea was that a lot of verbal communication along the supply chain would allow them to very rapidly respond to consumer demand and to different trends that were up and coming. This kind of transparent communication was very, very helpful. They were also helped by vertical integration and specialization, an idea where one company owns every single part of the supply chain, from the raw materials all the way to the garment factories, to the workers, and to selling them in the stores. And in specialization, each part of the company works on a very specific part of designing a piece of clothing. Additionally, the idea was to also cut costs by using low-quality material. Since the idea was to create many different lines of clothing, the idea was that the consumer would continue buying clothing and continue reabsorbing new materials, new pieces into their wardrobe while constantly discarding other ones out. So quality didn't matter as much. The goal was that the product would only last maybe a month. Some brands say 10 washes is how long a product is supposed to last. Additionally, another part of this is that they would have a short lead time. This is critical. In order to try to hit stores before the trend goes away, the idea would be to shorten the lead time or shorten the amount of time that a piece of clothing travels from being a pile of raw materials to being inside of stores. And the idea was that the shorter the lead time of a company has, the more competitive the company is in the fast fashion apparel market. There are different companies with different lead times. For example, Zara boasts a 2-week lead time, H&M boasts an 8-week lead time, and Forever 21 boasts a 6-week lead time. And this is all exponentially slower than other brands that we have seen in the past, where it would take seasons to develop a very strong clothing line, where the idea would be that the products would last the consumer a very, very long amount of time. So this ties into having many different product cycles per year, which is essentially just how often they're putting new clothes out into stores. This also encourages consumers to keep constantly buying new pieces of clothing with less regard to the environment and to the quality of the clothing that they are buying. Now, maybe this section won't be particularly interesting to you, but I personally really, really love history, and I think that it's a great way to examine how things come to be under the circumstances by which that idea came to happen. And I think that it's also very beneficial for if we want to decide that that idea and that process shouldn't be a thing anymore. Examining how it came to be can also help us understand how we can get it to not be anymore. So a lot of the history of the garment industry goes back all the way back to the British Industrial Revolution. So in the 16 and 1700s. The idea was, as people were slowly moving off of the farms into cities, people were having less time to make products in their own home, which means that the demand for ready-made garments was becoming a big concern. Additionally, the invention of slop shops, which are essentially what are modern-day thrift stores, where people would, instead of making their own clothes at home and would take the time doing that, they could instead just go to a slop shop and buy a ready-made garment that may not be as high quality because it hasn't been made like firsthand, but it still gets the job done for the work that they are doing. So additionally, cotton and textile innovations, particularly in America with like the development of the cotton gin, leads them to be able to be making very cheap products in factories. Britain in the Industrial Revolution was using the United States as a source of cotton. Now, British cotton textile has become one of the first global commodities. What this means is that it's not taking raw materials that have been grown right in that area and using them and turning them into a product, but instead it is using raw materials from places across the world and then being sent to a different place to basically turn them into a product and then being sent to a different place to sell. So this is what was happening when cotton was being grown in America, being sent to either British factories or to North American or factories in the American North and then being sold to British consumers. So a lot of the money from the British garment industry ended up propping up the United States and leading to the United States Industrial Revolution. And this is a very important point. This is something that a lot of supporters of the fast fashion industry will use as basically a way to justify the damage that the fast fashion industry is doing to the people that are working in it and to the planet that the industry is on. So the idea is that since the British garment industry was exploiting the United States, exploiting their workers, the slaves, and even this led to the United States' Industrial Revolution, which is ultimately a good thing because human development is generally seen as a good thing. The idea is that if the United States starts exploiting other countries and exploiting their resources and their labor, then eventually these countries will be able to enjoy the same kind of industrial revolution that the United States was able to do. So the advantage of using third world countries or developing countries is that you can use low-skill, low-cost laborers to do a very specific job. So you don't have to train them in an elaborate variety of different things, from like dyeing the cloth to processing the cloth to sewing the clothing to putting it all together and to like putting it on a person and trying to sell it. Instead, you can have someone focus on one very specific thing. You can have them know how to sew buttons onto a shirt, or you can teach them how to hem a piece of clothing. And this means that you are taking low-skill laborers because they don't need to know that much about what they're doing, and then you can pay them very little for what they are doing because they need money. So they're going to take whatever value their work is worth. Even if the companies themselves are undervaluing the cost of that work. So, H&M are some of the very first fast fashion companies to take off. H&M, I believe, started in Britain, and H&M started in Sweden, and they started to take off in the 1990s by following trends at very low prices. H&M is more specifically focused on cutting cost, while Zara is more specifically focused on the flexibility of their supply chains. That's not really important. I just think it's interesting. To explain to you exactly what I mean by clothing being low quality, an example of a great fast fashion product that's in my own closet is this shirt that I got from one of Forever 21's going out of business sales. And this, I literally have never worn this shirt because like as soon as I bought it, I realized how like horrible quality it is. And it kind of just made me gross, like feeling like I was gonna wear it. And also it doesn't fit me very well. One of my friends has worn it, so there you go. But one of the things that like really made me understand how low quality this is you can see this like the way that the button, the way that like the button side of things, like the little button thing, is attached to the rest of the shirt. Like this part isn't sewn in, it's kind of just like sewn at the edge and at the top edge, and then the rest of this is like very loose and flat, and it's not like pinned down. And if you compare that to a lot of other button-ups, like actual nice quality button-ups, that is not a thing that happens. I don't know if all of Forever 21's clothing is like this. Based on other pieces from that company that I have, I feel like not all of it is this horrible quality, but like, I don't know, you can see like you can see like stitches and stuff coming off of it. Can you see that? Is it gonna focus? I can do the like beauty guru thing. Yeah, I guess that helps. You can see that like there's like threads and stuff coming off of this, and like keep in mind I've never worn this shirt before, so like it just came like this. I don't know what possessed me to buy it. I guess probably because it was like $3, because it was Forever 21, and then it was also, everything was 70% off because the store was closing, so everything was just so impossibly cheap. I don't know, but that's just like an example of the quality of the type of products that you're getting from Forever 21. So now I want to talk about the concerns of fast fashion, and I'm going to start with the social problems with fast fashion. So that's things like how the fast fashion industry exploits its workers, and less about the environmental issues, which I will get into later. So there are a lot of social concerns with fast fashion. The fashion industry in general employs about 1 in 6 people on the planet, making it the most labor-intensive industry in the entire world, which is crazy, the idea that 1 out of every 6 people is somehow connected to the fashion industry. And a lot of those people are some of the most underpaid workers in the entire world, and these are people that live in countries and work in factories that make it so that they have absolutely no control over how much they're getting paid. They can't start unions, they can't petition for better rights and better working conditions, and they basically have no control over the way that the fashion industry works. These are people that have no control over the place that they work for, which is really scary and not a thing that we really think about living in America or any type of first world country, or in any developed country, I should say, 4th level country. Okay, 2 prime examples of the social concerns with the fast fashion industry was one where a factory in Bangladesh collapsed, killing a lot of the workers inside of it, jeopardizing the jobs of the people who work there, and causing many people to be severely injured or go missing under the rubble. And this was particularly scary because up until the day the building collapsed, the workers had been petitioning the factory owners to please reinforce the structure of the building because cracks were starting to spread up the walls, and they were asking the factory owners to fix or do something about it, and nothing was done. And then when the factory collapsed, then these people had nothing else to do but to go work in other teetering factories that might also be about to collapse. So this is just one prime example of people working in the fashion industry who have no control over the industry or anything about their working conditions, and it leading to some very, very serious problems. Another prime example of this was in Cambodia when factory workers were petitioning for higher wages. They were petitioning for, I believe, I can check my notes. Yes, they were petitioning for living wages of garment workers, and they were petitioning for $160 a month of a wage. That's $1,812 a year. That is mind-bogglingly little money. But they were basically protesting for living wages in Cambodia, and the protesters ended up being gunned down, met with live rounds by soldiers and police enforcement. And this is really scary because even the country of Cambodia really has no choice in this, because they are also living at the mercy of the developed countries that are forcing them to be able to produce these kinds of products. Because if they start paying their workers more, this charges the companies that the factories are working for more money, and this means that the companies like Zara and H&M are no longer competitive because their prices are no longer low enough. And this means that basically these countries are forced to keep their citizens down, basically to keep their citizens from not having living wages because of the pressures put on them by the entire fast fashion industry. Because at the end of the day, if the factories aren't producing this clothing for as little money as possible, they can go to another country like Bangladesh or Vietnam and take their business somewhere else, and then no one in that country has any jobs. And I don't know enough about the politics in Cambodia to be able to completely take the blame off of the Cambodian government for this problem with its citizens, but I would say that a lot of the blame does fall on the companies that these countries' factories are working for. That basically gives their workers so little control, again, about their working environments and their ability to, survive and thrive as human beings. So basically my point here is that the fast fashion industry exploits developing countries for access to resources and cheap labor, and also slack environmental regulation and labor laws, because the lack of control and exploitation is determined by first world consumers and is top down, meaning that it starts with the consumers, goes to the first world companies, then it is sent to the factories, and then the workers at the bottom of a very strong, rigid pyramid with no communication, essentially. The workers cannot negotiate conditions or pay, and one of the big problems of this is the invisibilization of workers. This is a concern that is brought up by the Modern Slavery Act, which is basically just an act that requires companies to report on essentially whether or not they're employing people under guidelines that are basically slavery. And one of the problems with this act is that companies can just say that they're not employing slaves, and then the act can't really do anything to enforce either way if they are lying or if they're not lying. And also, many of these companies are not part of the Ethical Trading Initiative, which was a goal to try to stop companies from doing this kind of thing. So let me look through my notes again to bring up exactly where I found this information, because I want to be accurate, and I want to use the right sources. This is my notebook for everything. So, okay. So, this is from a UK Parliament report, where the House of Commons basically did an investigative survey of the fast fashion industry, and kind of published this in a report, I believe in 2018 or 17. They basically asked Boohoo, which is a clothing group, about the working conditions of their laborers, and they asked if they would consider being part of the Ethical Trading Initiative. And the Boohoo group basically said that they didn't think that it would benefit suppliers, so that's why they are not part of the Ethical Trading Initiative. And when the UK House of Commons pushed a bit more and asked exactly how this would not benefit their suppliers, they said that it doesn't matter because they use the same standards as the Ethical Trading Initiative, so they don't feel like they need to be a part of it because they say that they think that they are doing the right thing. So this is kind of just an example of the invisibilization of the manual workers working in the fast fashion industry, because these companies can just say that they are doing the right thing, and there's no way to really enforce that, and there's no standards to explore if those claims that the companies are making that their products are being made in an ethical way is actually true. I'm getting more angry about this the more that I go, but this happens with everything that I write. Start with a topic that I care absolutely nothing about, and by the end of it I am so fucking heated. Now I am going to talk about the environmental concerns of the fast fashion industry. So, first of all, the fast fashion industry uses tons of limited natural resources and is the second biggest producer of pollution in the entire world, second only to the oil industry. So this is due to a lot of different things. Obviously, the fashion industry takes raw materials and turns them into a very different state from how that material originates. So there's a lot of factory work and there's a lot of synthesis that goes into turning the raw materials into a finished product. So this means that the places where the products are made, the places where the factories are often very, very polluted and pump tons of pollutions into the waterways around those areas. Like, for example, areas in India where the factories produce the clothing and send the chemicals that are the output of the production directly into the main river in India, which is already seriously and dangerously polluted. And this also causes a lot of pollution in actual physical materials, because where else are these products going to go? You can burn them, or destroy them somehow, which pollutes the sky. You could put them in the river, which pollutes the river. You could put them on the land, which pollutes the land and impacts the biodiversity of the creatures and animals living there, the plants that live there. So that's one of the concerns. Additionally, the kind of origin of a lot of these resources are also very dangerous. So, for example, cotton is the primary thing that is used in a lot of clothes making nowadays, because it is a very soft fiber and it's very breathable and it's very easy to wear. So a lot of consumers favor that product quite a lot. Makes sense. The problem is that cotton is difficult to produce because it takes a lot of pesticides to grow it, and when pesticides are being sprayed on the surrounding environments around these farms, the people that live there and in the villages and in the towns and cities can be impacted severely in ways of birth defects and high rates of cancer and developmental disorders, due to the intense amount of pesticides that are being used to try to grow the product. Another concern is that in an attempt to shift away from using cotton and limited natural resources, the development of synthetic materials, synthetic microfibers like plastics, have been developed to try to supplement the cotton industry. If I can find the statistic, which I wrote about. Yeah, 40% of the global textile production is plastic material. Eventually, since this plastic does not decompose and does not organically break down, it is eventually released into oceans and waterways in the form of microplastics that can be consumed by fish, and then goes up the food chain into being consumed by humans. And obviously, as little tiny pieces of plastic, that doesn't particularly affect us that much, but the long-term buildup of it can affect us in the food that we eat and in the food that the animals eat, in the collapsing of the animal ecosystem. Another big problem is the way that consumer waste is encouraged by the fast fashion industry. As I have talked about before, the idea of very fast, very quick production cycles means that there is always new clothing in the markets, which means that people will always be shopping for clothing in the markets. And this is a concern, because this means that eventually those clothings, especially since they are very low quality, will be discarded. And a lot of people, I hope, donate their clothing to secondhand stores and thrift stores. However, a lot of this isn't actually ever sold, because a lot of it is unwearable due to the quick changes in trends and due to the low quality of the material itself. So, wait, I can actually find the statistic on it. I think I wrote it down. Okay, yeah. 10% of the clothing that is donated to thrift stores will actually get locally sold. So where does the other 90% of this goes? A lot of it is shipped in bulk to other countries, like countries in the Caribbean, sent in like literal blocks of clothing that have been like stuffed together, wrapped in plastic wrap, and then like transported off to other countries. And people can like buy these blocks of clothing and like dig through it and hope to like find something new. And obviously, a lot of it isn't wearable because it's not wearable in the United States. So a lot of the problems with this is that now we're basically just like shifting our problem from like, oh, we have a lot of clothing waste here in the United States. Let's just give this problem to other countries and have them deal with it instead. So yeah, in the end of the day, just a lot of the clothing ends up in landfills where it'll eventually decompose, or if it's made out of plastic fibers, it will turn into microplastics and just degrade down into little tiny pieces where it'll exist until the end of time, which isn't that uplifting. So one of the main problems with the structure of fast fashion is that it has a very, very long supply chain. And what this means is that there's profit without consequence. So let me explain that. The fashion companies do not employ the factories directly, meaning that, like, yes, they might be in, like, contracts with them, but, like, technically, on a technicality, the companies do not directly employ the factories, meaning that the companies are not being held responsible for the conditions in the factories, the conditions in the areas around the factories, because that problem is being shifted to other countries and basically for other people to worry about the environmental and social impacts of this. So I've talked a lot about the fast fashion industry in terms of like what exactly it means specifically. But when you're going to go shop at a company, you won't know up front if this company is employing factories that pay their workers 13 cents an hour to do what they do. So here are just some ways that you can know if the companies that you are looking into are employing fast fashion. So these companies will generally have many, many different products. And you'll also notice that these products are going to be changing rapidly. Like I said, with the product cycles, so this is a very easy way to tell if the company that you're looking at is a fast fashion company. Additionally, a lot of these companies will have very trendy clothing and small inventory. The small inventory is to increase the like supply and demand thing, because once the product is sold out, you literally can't sell it anymore. So this increases the like trendy aspect of it because it's very limited. And it also allows them to waste less time on production and more time on responding to consumer demand as quickly as possible before the trend runs out. You can also see if the material is low quality, and this can be kind of difficult to find, but sometimes if you look at like the model photos, then you can find that. Additionally, the prices are generally going to be really extremely low, kind of like unbelievably low prices. And if this is a thing that you are noticing, then chances are this is a fast fashion company. Another good thing to do is to check the product reviews. Oftentimes, if the quality is a lot worse than people were expecting, they will comment about it. So if you can check the product reviews and there seems to be a general consensus that the product is kind of very, very low quality, there are also different apps and different like standards that you can check. So for example, the Good On You app is an app, not plugged, not sponsored, hashtag not an ad. You can go review there to kind of like type in the company's name and see what their like level of certification is. And there are also other like governmentally regulated standards like the Fair Trade, the Global Organic Textile Standard, and the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and like I mentioned previously, the Ethical Trade Initiative guidelines. So you can look into those sources to try to figure out if the brand that you are looking into purchasing things from is kind of in line with your perceptions of what a good and moral company should be. Additionally, if you do some like digging on the brand's website, a lot of them will often tell you things about how the brand is sustainable or things like that. So I would just encourage you to not take the information that is directly on the brand's website at face value. So now I want to talk about how you cannot contribute to fast fashion. Now, one of that is also just like being educated about fast fashion and learning about it, and being aware of the problems with it. But there are some more direct ways that you can help not support the fast fashion industry. Primarily, it's just being smart about the brands that you buy. One of the ways that you can do this is thrift shop, and this actually helps in two different ways. A, it helps you not directly support the fast fashion industry, and it helps you contribute to that 10% of clothing that is not sent to other countries in bulk packages to make it other countries' problems, but instead you are contributing to local markets that are likely to benefit people more than shopping at fast fashion conglomerates. Additionally, you can buy less clothing, and this generally just means like buying more expensive, higher quality clothing will last you longer and will likely be more worth it in the long term than buying a bunch of really cheap pieces. So I encourage you to do a lot of research about the pieces of clothing that you want and really try to understand why you want that piece of clothing, if there are any other pieces of clothing in your closet that can give you the same effect as the piece of clothing that you want, and if the company that you're looking for it from isn't a very ethical company, if you can try to find that product somewhere else. I also encourage you to simply just not buy any new clothing. You likely have a lot of clothes in your closet that you don't wear, and it might not be trendy anymore, but trends resurface. It happened to choker necklaces, and it happened to bucket hats. It can happen to emo knee-high Converse. I want to believe. So I just encourage you to try to fall back in love with pieces that you already own, pieces that you already committed to buying. So this pretty much brings me to the end of what I want to say. I hope that this video helped you understand more about the fast fashion industry, the dark secrets of the fashion industry, and maybe you came to your own conclusions, and hopefully you did some of your own internal thinking about how you might be or might not be contributing to the fast fashion industry. So this is kind of like a bit of a concern, because I do want to make sure that people are being held accountable for what they're doing to other people and to the planet. But I mean, it's also acknowledgeable that consumers can't control all their choices, and it's kind of hard to guilt people into taking steps to fix this, especially when I myself am a person that is not perfect, and I do not do things all in the right way. I do not live a guilt-free life where I do everything I can to help people and the planet. I do try to do some things that help, but I do understand that you as a consumer cannot bring yourself to care about all of the problems in the world. So I just encourage you to try to bring yourself to your limit of what you want to contribute, of how you want to contribute to mitigating this problem. So thank you for listening. I have been Sasha, and I hope that you learned something, and I hope that this video made you think a little bit. So like and subscribe, I guess.